Hello and welcome to this Financial Friday session. My name is Venkatesh Gopal. I'm from MoveMe. In this session, in the series of Financial Fridays, we've always been trying to pick up different aspects of shared mobility, electric vehicles, and try to see how those make sense in terms of feasibility, how in terms of like customer service, operations, policy, all of that comes together and favors the sustenance, not just in terms of like environmental, but also being financially sustainable operations for shared mobility. And going forward, we've also seen so many modes for micromobility. We've seen car sharing. Today, we are taking a little bit of a broader view into like car sharing and car rentals. And I have two very leading people from the industry joining us in this session. And the session that we have today is about, if I had to pose a question, it would be, how may car rentals and car sharing operators electrify their fleet? And why should they do that? We know that these organizations have always been able to support our cities by providing some way of like flexibly getting around without owning a vehicle. Car rental has been there for ages, and car sharing now, for the last couple of decades, has been more commonplace in many cities across the world. While solving some of the congestion problem, car sharing operators have been testing EVs on their fleet. Car rental operators have been testing EVs on their fleet, and then the results have been quite promising. But there have been definitely some challenges in how many vehicles they would get on their fleet. But at the same time, there is benefits in terms of like how many operation costs they can save. All this into like improving air quality. Would this mean like a win-win-win partnership between cities, operators, and the users? This is what we wanted to find out, and a couple of things about like some things about challenges, some things about the benefits. And yeah, and this is one of the things we'll be talking about today. Thank you for joining us. And on the panel, I have Damon Aldrich from Enterprise Car Rental, and I have Nick DiPrima from UFODRIVE. Damon, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself and the business?
Oh, just to clarify the question. So just a kind of a brief overview of the business and how we're approaching electrification.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Yes. So Enterprise really is a multi, I would say, very much a very diverse mobility business. And I think that that's really aided us in approaching electrification from the outset. And that's to say that among our lines of business, there are lines that are easier to electrify than others. There are different approaches depending on the customer. And so largely, you could say that Enterprise is divided into two really big parts. One is car rental, and the other being fleet management. And that's particularly true in the US. Car share, of course, is a big piece of it in Europe. And we also have a pretty thriving truck rental and also a commute business as well. And so there's two really big components of any of this, and that is vehicle suitability, largely having to do with range, duty cycle, whether the vehicle is fit for purpose, and then there's the corresponding charging infrastructure. And on the rental side, there are some really big challenges, some big opportunities as well, but largely it's the access to power, which is going to be very, very important for really concentrated loads when EVs reach a higher penetration rate, particularly at locations like airports, where we could see several megawatts of power being needed at once during peak return and rental times. And that is in large part been the focus of conversations with the industry, with policymakers, and with the authorities having jurisdiction, whether they're airports or other port authorities. So that's been a big conversation. On the fleet side, I'll just keep this short on this, is that there are nearer term opportunities with regard to depot-based vehicles in which we play a role as a trusted advisor to our customers, and not just delivering a vehicle that's at a full state of charge, but really taking them through the entire life cycle of electrification and really starting with the why and getting to the how, and really arriving at a point where there's a very sustainable operation that yields a positive TCO, a total cost of ownership. So the two pieces are very distinct. There are different opportunities and different challenges in each. And that's generally how we are breaking down the world of EV for our own business transformation that we're undertaking now.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview, Damon. And yeah, I would like to take Nick, and maybe Nick, just a little bit about UFODRIVE and how your background, and then a little bit about how the EVs and car rental and car sharing industry has been growing.
Sure, and thanks for having me today, Venkatesh. It's a real pleasure. It's a pleasure to work with Damon as well. I'm Nick DiPrima, head of SaaS sales North America at UFODRIVE. UFODRIVE is the all-electric, all-digital car rental experience. Following our launches of 18 European self-service all-electric car rental locations, we recently launched our sold-out centers in San Francisco and Austin here in the US, and we're bringing this now to Boston, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. So no lines, no paperwork, no upsells, and no car keys, just a great VIP and upscale EV rental experience. You know, we've proven that electric vehicles, by connecting them to the drivers and to the operations team and to the grid, and then automating the processes among them with AI and rules, we can produce major improvements and profits and efficiencies to the rental businesses that we support. So while our own consumer location launches are exciting, we're just as excited to have companies like Hertz, Merchants Fleet, and others leveraging our SaaS platform to accelerate their electric and shared mobility adoption.
That's wonderful to hear. And then, yeah, we've been looking at how UFODRIVE has been growing, and the market as a whole, in terms of like electrifying, has become quite interesting. So taking off some points that Damon, you just mentioned, like why are the passenger fleets looking to electrify? Like you talked about fleet management and that B2B sort of business. So why are they trying to electrify? What's in it for them? And what in general, maybe give an idea of how the industry and how the car sharing or car rental industry is looking at electrifying. Is it like an aggressive push towards like, no, we have to electrify within this time frame? Is that something that is going on?
Yeah, really, really good questions. I would say that, yeah, that there are these distinct differences that we're drawing, between the B2B sorts of businesses where we manage fleets, and where and then making that distinction, on the rental side, it being very, very different, where it's much more B2C, where we're renting directly to a consumer. So I'll start on the fleet side, and that is that there are, really clarifying the reasons for electrification is actually one of the first orders of business on the fleet side, because the approach can change very dramatically depending on what outcomes are being sought. So say, for example, if there's an environmental driver, which in large part the entire movement of EVs, you could say, is really born out of the desire to decarbonize, to help the environment, to reduce greenhouse gases, and so on and so forth. And policy has been doing has been an enormous catalyst in driving these changes. And I think that fleet owners generally understand this trend, and they understand that the longer term implication here is that they need to adapt to a future that is electrified, for all of the right reasons, but also for business reasons that are economic in nature as well. And so they are seeking to understand, what is it going to mean for their business and their operations? Can they continue to support the customer in the way that the customer is accustomed to, where they've derived competitive advantage? And are there opportunities to actually lower costs and have a positive TCO? In large part, that's really what we're seeing on the fleet side. Now, fleet composition, what is available in market in terms of what EVs are suitable, are really all of the kinds of decision-making that needs to be made up front. as well as speccing the right kind of charging infrastructure that's going to be suitable for that new fleet going forward. So those are two big decisions that need to be made on the fleet side. What are the drivers on the rental side? It's a little bit more of a complex picture, because there you have a driving public that is, car rental, you could say, is the oldest, operating model for car share that there is. It kind of started with, public access to vehicles. For those who don't have a private vehicle because they're traveling or because they just choose to operate that way. The difficulty on the car rental side is largely around now charging anxiety more than anything else. It's even if we outfit facilities perfectly with the right kind of charging infrastructure, the question remains, how ready is the charging infrastructure in public and in the wild to support the customer in a positive way? And that's what we're increasingly turning attention to, which is how do you support that customer while they're in the wild, and giving them that higher level of confidence so that adoption continues to take place in this area.
Yeah, that way I'm also thinking if the concept of supporting the customer on the road, like the roadside service or battery services, is something that is picking up. We definitely are seeing those businesses coming up, but yeah, it's only time will tell how feasible they are, how practical they get. And to your point, I know it's more, earlier we used to keep talking about the term range anxiety, and now that you're mentioning that it's about more of a charging anxiety, I think it's less of a fear that you would run out of charge in terms of the 400 kilometer or 350 through 400 kilometer range that you have, but it's about what happens and where are you going to get that charged next, right? So because you pretty much have an idea of your every trip is not going to be that long, but the thing is, when it happens or when the range fluctuates because of the altitude, the gradient that you're riding or the temperature or whatever, then how do you go around plugging your car in? And to that point, I also wanted to direct a couple of questions to you, Nick, because UFO, while having a background with car rental, also has dipped its toes in some way in Europe in car sharing somewhat. And in that sense, it becomes a little bit more of a, and you don't have this, the counter where users are going to come back. So how do you see the rental or the sharing or the user base is taking up? Are they open to trying out EVs? Do they like EVs? Do they keep liking EVs after they've tried it a few times?
I had to smile while Damon was mentioning, that car rental was sort of the earliest car sharing, of course. I remember these early ads from Hertz and Enterprise, convincing businessmen that when they land, they should go rent a car. It was a novel concept. And, last year, and it seemed like every Super Bowl ad was geared towards convincing the public that EVs are now inevitable, right? My favorite was, Tom Brady giving himself a recharge, at the car rental lot. Manufacturers aren't asking us anymore. This means that car rental companies don't have much of a choice but to electrify. Last year, I read for the very first time that more than half of all consumers who intend to buy a car in the next 24 months say they'll pick an EV or a hybrid, and that's a huge turning point. And so, the good news is that once rental operations are live with EVs, and our platform, of course, helps them to do that, the numbers are fantastic. I think Damon will tell you the back end numbers are great. But the two main issues are really with massive adoption, it's really charger supply and availability, and then fleet availability in that order, really. So the timing is right for organizations, including these larger commercial fleets, to get started.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Similar to every other, I think, automotive innovation that we've seen, the bigger scale that happens on the commercial side is something that the industry starts testing first. And to that experience point, then I'm going to like throw this out there. Maybe Damon, Nick, whoever wants, you can comment on this. So what's your experience in terms of like the EVs and how users have been looking at this? Like how do they experience in terms of like when they rent an EV versus an ICE EV on the rental side? And then on the fleet side, how are operators then looking at do they continue liking the EVs after a few pilots? Are they looking to like, yes, this makes sense. It's definitely going to be something that we would go ahead. And yeah, on the rental side, is it, I mean, on the car sharing, like the public car sharing side, we know that operators are not able to put a difference in the pricing. So the EVs on the car sharing is the same as the other ones. How is it in the car rental side? And if there is a difference, are we seeing that users are more preferring EVs still?
I'll start on the car rental side. I think that we see demand on a regional basis really climbing pretty high in states like California. New registrations of EVs is climbing above 16%. On a national basis, it's hovering just below, I think, 6. So there's a regional effect here that I think that's taking place. Number one, which is where are EVs best suited, and where can customers have the best success? Right. I mean, ultimately, a customer who rents a vehicle just does not want an uninterrupted trip. They want the most uninterrupted, smoothest trip that they can have, between point A and point B, and then certainly getting back to the airport in time for their flight. So, we're seeing that that customers are making decisions based on kind of their own point of view on the level of confidence that they can have in the product. So we have a power user who may drive an EV at home, who may be also familiar with the local area in which they're renting a vehicle in terms of understanding where the infrastructure is and what that experience is going to be like. It really does come down in large part to predictability and reliability. And that comes from a certain perspective that the customer has. Now, our branch operators are very, very good at screening customers to ensure that the customer experience really is upheld, and that we don't want to put anyone in an EV that is not really kind of prepared to understand some of the differences. Even as it stands today, I don't know about your own experience running vehicles, but it always takes a couple minutes when you first get into a car to know how to adjust the mirrors, right? How, where are the controls? I got to get my radio set, my phone paired, and all this other stuff. So there's already a learning process that needs to take place just with traditional ICE vehicles. That education process, we can't undervalue that. It's so incredibly important that EV product be intuitive and natural by way of really understanding the driver and understanding how to make that simple. So I don't think we're quite there yet, and I would say that there's still a price parity issue on the table. And I think when you go to rental sites and you look at EVs, they tend to be markedly more expensive. And I think that's largely because we're still kind of awaiting that mix of vehicles that is indeed coming very quickly, that is for that right price point that makes it affordable for most rental customers. So those are just some of the highlights that I would share with you at this point.
That's great insight. At UFODRIVE, we found that consumers really respond well to a high-end EV rental experience. We had to add fleet in New York City as soon as it opened because the demand was so high. And so, part of the advantage of electric vehicles is that they're also connected vehicles. And so, if any of our customers have a question, we can even turn on the AC for them. We can pop the trunk. So we can provide, using electric vehicles, a higher level of service. And so a lot of the consumer challenges we're going to see go away over time, because these vehicles are software based. The user interfaces seem to get better and better and more intuitive. We bridge those gaps with our mobile app and our operations customer service staff, customer experience staff. So it's really the connectivity and the automation have become so important into making EVs easy to adopt.
Yeah, I relate to that, both the points, because one is, yes, it is fun to have something more connected, and for whatever reason, EVs are just easier that way. And manufacturers, I think the also point the point is also that Nick, you made earlier, was like manufacturers are moving there fast no matter what. So it's inevitable that the fleet mix will come towards, and it's going towards like more EVs. And I think that way it makes sense for them to like put all the new technologies in an EV rather than just going with like a status quo IC engine. And yeah, I totally relate to that point in terms of like getting into a rental car, and then now it's like, oh, okay, this is totally different. This is not what I used to be. And then, oh, this is not the radio, this is not the mirrors, it's not the seat's not, I don't know, the seat's like motorized or it's not. So it's different. And EVs are like, yeah, if you've not been driving an EV, this is just way weirder for users, because the first time I was in an EV, I didn't even know that the engine was not, the motor was on. Right, so there is nothing, and nobody looks at the RPM or anything, and there's nothing that in an EV that shows other than the standard lights that go on. Takes a while for you to, as a driver, to get used to what you're driving. So I think there is that definitely a learning curve that needs to be hit. And while we are speaking about technology, then, other than the powertrain itself, which is amazing by itself, and then what kind of other products or technology have we seen? I think this is towards hinting towards like more like a SaaS platform or a connected vehicle. How can technology elevate that experience into creating different innovative products, innovative services with the same vehicle that we know?
I'm happy to start. I think I mentioned it earlier. Next generation vehicles, which EVs are, they're all connected. And, I really believe that this technology becomes even more critical as vehicles move towards autonomous as well. Perhaps another day's discussion on that one, right, Damon? But the charging infrastructure, both on premises and off, is largely open to connectivity, and standards are being adopted so that there's much more optimization and autonomy in the charging of electric fleets. And this is so critical as EV fleets expand. The challenge, right, is how do we maximize the limited infrastructure that we have? Whether it's the power infrastructure, the EVs themselves, right? And so we need to get as many miles out of each EV that's on the road today that we can, for the environmental benefits, for the financial benefits, which are confirmed. And tools like the UFODRIVE SaaS platform, kind of connect it all together and give a holistic view of where everything is and where opportunities for correction are.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on a couple of the themes that Nick just mentioned. I really like the some of the intelligence about what is happening with a fleet. It seems to be just really growing at orders of magnitude. Just what is happening with the fleet? How can I optimize, right? And so those optimization capabilities just seem to be increasing incredibly. And one of the areas that I would point out is that what is often not a part of the conversation in electrification is that the fact that we're decarbonizing is the big issue. And I think sometimes that drowns out some of the other really important matters, which is energy efficiency even, right? And so not every EV is just as efficient as another in how it consumes power, and also its ability to deliver services back to the grid. That this is a kind of a closed loop ecosystem that will help support itself. That it's not just consuming; it could be also feeding back needed energy during needed times. The technology that I'm most excited about, and it might sound like it's maybe not ambitious enough, is not necessarily just autonomy, but really the safety benefits that come through, ADAS, ADAS, right? The driver assistance technologies, which seem, you'd mentioned earlier that the investments in a lot of R&D budgets, and the numbers are telling us right now that well over 50% of R&D budgets in most of the OEMs are really now being driven into EVs, that those driver assistance technologies will save lives, and they will certainly help driving standards along to a much greater degree. And that's really another really exciting area, I think, about that transition to EVs.
I'm glad you brought that up, Damon. And am I the only one that's had the brakes go on automatically for them in the last couple of years?
Yeah, and again, talking about consumer driver adaptation to these, not just the new powertrain, and I think that's what we're saying here, is that it's not just about the powertrain. It really is a transformation of the product of the vehicle itself. It's turning into something entirely different than what we're used to. And it changes the way we interface with the vehicle, and it changes the way we think about mobility. And adapting to a world in which the vehicle is making some decisions for us, or maybe certainly assisting in a more assertive way, that is going to be a process. And when you talk about the ownership experience of an EV, which again, to kind of bring it back to the enterprise business model, there's a chance for, on the fleet management side, for there to be an ownership EV experience versus on the rental side, which is more of a transient or temporary EV experience. It has its pluses and minuses, but this adaptation can happen much more readily through an ownership experience than it can on the rental side. So again, it really emphasizes the great importance of an education process, of a very intuitive product on the rental side, versus versus being feature rich, and maybe the possibility of it being a longer runway for learning to take place on the ownership side. So these are just some lessons learned that we've taken away through our own pursuit.
Yeah. So what we are hearing is that the EV transition, more than just being like environmentally sustainable or making sense financially, from the user side, it also needs a little bit more work in terms of like education, awareness, making that part of what they always are used to doing. Then there is definitely this issue of, this benefit of monitoring driver behavior, improving that, and having maybe a little bit more control, because it's all an electrical system now. And those way, the exciting things that we've been talking about, not just AVs and connected cars, but also like bringing that safety element into picture, and then making sure that they are elevated in terms of like experience and safety. And the third is also like, as we've been experiencing from all these questions, is one thing is definitely a common thread, which is the charging infrastructure. Whether it be the charging infrastructure which is currently available, maybe there is not enough charging infrastructure, maybe the charging infrastructures are not connected, are they not performing to the level that we expect them, are they at the right places that the users need them, and finally, are they equipped to go to that, like the next level, the V2G, vehicle to grid kind of level, where almost every charging infrastructure then may be equipped with like balancing this the power grid versus the electric utilization, right? So in that sense, and this is towards my last question, I think the first part of that question would be in terms of like regulations and what the cities and the authorities are able to do. How do you see the charging infrastructure topic being dealt with in terms of like land use, in terms of the technology, in terms of regulations, like regulating how many charging infrastructure should be up? What does it mean battery charging infrastructures are up and running. And how is that being supported by public funding, public regulations? And then we'll get into a couple of other things on the car side itself.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that first if you like. And it's interesting to look at this on a time scale, right? Where are we now in 2022 versus where we were, say, back in, I don't know, 2015, 2017 timeframe. Largely, the efforts that were made to date have been very, very good. But let's be honest, it's woefully underfunded, or it has been historically, and just generally not enough, just not enough infrastructure. And I think that we're in a situation now where the risk is we get vehicles in operation, that number, that EV penetration rate at large, ahead of the needed infrastructure, especially the public charging infrastructure and the infrastructure that is accessible to those who don't have a private garage or property owners. The one thing I would say about this in terms of its movement forward is, just by way of some of the numbers, that if the federal goals are met by 2030 in terms of EV penetration, we'll have about roughly 44 million EVs on the road by that time, which will require 1.2 million charge points. We're at 160,000 now. So in the space of about 8 years, we've got a lot of work to do, right? And it's amazing to think about, even with 7.5 billion in NEVI and many other states that are funding some of their own infrastructure, that still is not even close to being enough. So we look around at partnership potential. What is our role in improving the infrastructure readiness for the EV penetration that we're expecting to take place in this, by the end of this decade? That is probably one of the biggest priorities. I can't think of really a bigger priority for electrification than that. But it's not, and where I'll finish my comment is in where I urge my fellow stakeholders in this process is that it's not just about money. The pace of the development is hindered by vast differences in approaches to permitting, to land use, to some of the things that you just mentioned that really do need to be smoothed out. California has AB 1236 that it sought to kind of even out the EV infrastructure requirements amongst different jurisdictions across the state. There's still more work to be done to make sure that that's actually taking place. And we definitely urge all of our partners to kind of join in this effort to streamline the effort so that it actually can take on a new momentum and a new pace that actually gets us to the 1.2 million that we're going to need.
I know, yeah, and that is like you said, it's the one priority that everybody should probably rank the infrastructure before now, because it could be earlier it was like the chicken and egg story. Now we know which is first. So it's like better we get the charging infrastructure and the grid management or the grid load ready before we push into too many EVs everywhere. Otherwise, it's just going to be difficult to manage all of these. And in terms of like the charging infrastructure, Nick, I know what do you think about like connecting charging infrastructure, and how does that fit into like the whole experience? Does that work? Does it not work?
Yeah, it's it's a really good point. In addition to universal standards that Damon was talking about beyond charging, there's still a lot to be done in terms of standardizing charging infrastructure and connectivity. We can get a lot, but it varies from partner to partner, and it becomes so important into automating electric vehicle fleets. I want to know before the vehicle guides me to a charging station, if there's an available charger there, at what rate will I get that charge? And so we have to maximize what we have. The good news is the time to start electrifying your fleets is now. Our clients, like Hertz and merchants and others, they're accelerating, their EV adoption. We have a licensee, they're operating at the airport, but they want to do self-service EV locations in town. where they're in high demand and the infrastructure is available. So it's not about delaying; it's about getting started and working hard to pull all these things together. The Deficit Reduction Act was a great start, and the things that we're doing at UFODRIVE to bring consumers electric vehicles where they need them, it's a great start. But the real work, as I think Damon identified, is in these larger fleet segments, and it's going to take some time and a lot of work. And believe me, we're starting to get there, aren't we?
Yeah, hopefully we do faster on the infrastructure than the vehicles. So the last question that I had was part of what you already mentioned, Nick. How is the government subsidies or the rebate schemes designed to manage fleet rebates? Because I know a bunch of rebates that happen in Canada and the US don't actually favor car sharing or fleets. It caps the subsidies. So as of now, if I look at the rebates and the subsidies, it's favoring more like the personal owned versus car rental or car sharing or any fleet-based business. What's your experience? I could be wrong. What's your experience in like how are fleet able to manage these subsidies? Is it good enough for them to like bring down that initial investment cost? First, maybe Nick, you comment on a couple of fleets that you've seen, and then maybe we'll tie it up with enterprise.
We've done a lot of work with clean cities and clean fuel organizations at the regional level. Each of these, whether it's in Michigan or New York tri-state region, they're partnering with energy suppliers to have special incentives in place for these fleets. So there's some there. There's also great programs in place to help provide equitable electric transportation to communities. So there's funding through. I was at the 4th Mobility Roadmap conference last year, where it was a huge topic on how we can help to electrify some of these more disadvantaged communities. So I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of subsidies. Some exist, but it's largely regional. And again, these universal standards should be encouraged.
Yeah, on the infrastructure bill and the IRA, I think what we have is, we're still at the very beginning with both, right? It really, we have yet to see the actual activity take place. We're very, very eager to see it. We know that the funding is just kind of starting to happen, right? So I think there's a lot of anticipation here for a lot of really good things to happen. The one thing I would mention about the IRA and what it does in the commercial side is pretty unique in the sense that what you don't have on the private fleet side or the retail side, which is a North America assembly requirement and these other requirements that are on that, and the fact that for class 3 and above, there's a price parity kind of gap closure mechanism there that can take the rebate, the credit up to $40,000 from what we understand. So we have a lot yet, I think, to see in terms of the clarification of how exactly both of these really big bills are going to be rolled out and what that implementation is going to look like. But they're certainly they're historically large and have the potential to do a lot of good. So we're very active in terms of observing right now how this actually ends up changing the current dynamic, which is that public charging infrastructure needs improvement. EV penetration rates are definitely going to be increasing as a result of these investments.
Yeah, that almost sounded like a nice little summary to what you've been mentioning, Damon. And I for one am excited looking at now reminding myself of like these bills that are in place and probably will be passed, and they'll definitely be benefiting the whole industry, especially the fleets. And this is what has moved me. We are like trying to get to like more equitable, more shareable assets and vehicles out there. That way, it's more of us can think about like moving from one place to the other, and less about how we are going to do it. And the experts and the fleets take care of that, right? And in that sense, I think I have a lot of learnings from this episode of Financial Fridays. I would like Nick and Damon have like a rapid fire, maybe a 30-second or a 40-second closing comment on the industry and your take. And then we'll call it a close. So Nick, let's go with you in the rapid fire first, and then we'll end with Damon.
At UFODRIVE, we're passionate about accelerating the transition to electric vehicles. We started in the car rental space because we thought it could use a lot of work from a customer satisfaction point of view, as well as an ease of use perspective. Having expanded that over the last 4 years, we're now tackling these larger commercial fleets, as well as growing our experience. We think that we can set a really high bar with electric vehicle satisfaction, and provide users such a great experience with EVs that there's no reason to go back. And so we appreciate having the invitation to share a little bit about our experience with you today, Venkatesh, and hope that by working with great people like Damon and his team at Enterprise, and you and Sandra at MoveMe, we can accelerate this transition, for a cleaner future, and also, frankly, increase efficiencies and profits for our clients.
Yeah, and at Enterprise, we really, I would want to close out with our point of view is that we have a real partnership mindset on approaching the future right now. It's a very unique time where parties that before wouldn't necessarily be in the same circles or speak at the same table, like utilities and car makers, are now at the table discussing how we get this done in the right way, and that is really where Enterprise is very, very committed to working with policymakers, working with cities and governments, OEMs, and many, many others to see how we can together combine efforts to advance electrification and the adoption of electric and zero emission vehicles, and at the same time doing so in a very business sustainable way and an ecologically sustainable way. So we look forward to that future, and we're really leaning in.